Hello and warm greetings. Welcome to the Analyst by Vajiram and Ravi, where we would try to comprehensively analyze 7 articles in 3 different sections along with the mains practice question. In the analysis part, we'll first talk about the environmental degradation of India's coastline, the current status, the causative factors, impacts and the way forward. Then in the second article, we'll have a discussion regarding India's sweet revolution with a specific reference to India's honey sector and bee conservation. Then in the mains validation, we'll talk about the time use survey, which highlights the double burden which is imposed on the women with respect to their personal obligations and professional responsibilities. Then in the prelims pointers, we'll talk about 4 important articles from a special perspective of the upcoming UPSC prelims examination 2027. So stay tuned. Coming to the very first topic of today's discussion, this is about coastal erosion, India's shrinking shorelines. Before I start the discussion, in today's The Hindu on page number 8, there is one particular editorial which has been authored by Mr. Shashi Tharoor, which talks about various aspects of one nation, one election, which has been oft times covered in the Analyst. So you can watch any of the videos to comprehensively cover it. Then on page number 10, the text and the context section, we have a piece with respect to the delimitation. If you really want to understand what delimitation is all about, what are the various aspects of delimitation, what are the associated challenges and what should be the way forward, you can just watch the Analyst of 15th of April. I myself covered that. So comprehensively, it addresses the demand with respect to delimitation. Now coming back to this particular topic, today we have taken quite diverse topic in the sense of the coastal erosion, and we also talk about the India's sweet revolution in terms of the India's honey sector and the bee conservation. So quite diverse topics. Coming to this particular topic, see, what you'll have to understand is that India has a very long coastline. According to the revised estimates, we have the coastline of India to the tune of almost 11,098 kilometers, right? Now, this speaks about the issues with respect to the coastal erosion. We have many parts or many areas, many regions in the coasts which are suffering from excessive coastal erosion. And this is something which is not just affecting the local population, rather it's affecting different sectors. You talk about the livelihoods of the farmers, you talk about the stability of the infrastructure, you talk about the aspects of blue economy. You must be aware that we are actually focusing upon coming up with the concept of blue economy, which basically talks about to enhance the overall number of ports, to enhance the coastal industries, to go for sustainable development in the coastal region, to enhance the shipping aspect, right? To enhance the offshore energy aspect. But again, because of this menace, because of this issue of coastal erosion, all things are at stake. And this is something which is a very serious issue, right? We have one particular piece which has been featured in the Indian Express, which talks about specific reference to Odisha, right? There are places in Odisha which are actually witnessing a lot of coastal erosion. So therefore, this particular topic becomes really important. What we will do is we'll talk about what coastal erosion is all about. We'll talk about the current status of coastal erosion. We'll talk about the causative factors. What are the factors which are responsible for that? We'll talk about the impact it has on various dimensions. And then we'll also talk about the way forward. We'll try to comprehensively cover it. It forms a part of GS3, Environment and Conservation. According to this particular article itself, more than 1/3 of India's assessed coastline is experiencing erosion. Can you just imagine? More than 33% of India's assessed coastline is basically witnessing erosion. A very serious issue. Not just environment and conservation, but it also deals with the disaster management. It also deals with the urbanization aspect in the coastal regions, right? We have many of these cities. We have Mumbai, we have Chennai, we have Kolkata. So therefore, this is a very important concern. Now, let's first understand what is coastal erosion. Now, see, the very objective of these sessions and analysis is to make sure that you develop robust answer writing. If you have a question with respect to coastal erosion, it would be much better if you talk about or if you write the definition of coastal erosion. The definition of coastal erosion says the gradual removal and the landward retreat of sediments from the shoreline because of the waves, because of the currents, because of the tides, storms and human-induced changes. This is the definition of coastal erosion. Now, let's say that we have this particular area sea and over here you have land. Okay? Because of the wave action, because of the currents, because of the tides, you have a push towards the land. And that what it does is that you have a lot of sediments over here, and these sediments these sediments are basically taken away because of the wave energy, and then they are further pushed towards the land. Okay, what it does is that now you have, previously you had the shoreline over here. Because of the wave action, what happens is that the shoreline moves ahead. It goes towards the land, it moves landwards, and that is how you have the advancing of this particular shoreline towards the land. Okay, this also leads to a lot of the removal of the sediments, and that is what we call as coastal erosion. Okay, this is the definition which you have. These are the causative factors. What is the force? See, ultimately you have the geophysical phenomena. You have these factors, for example, in the form of the waves. You have the wave energy, then you have the currents, then you have the tides, then you have the cyclones. You have a lot of cyclonic activity in the Bay of Bengal region, and that is one of the factors which basically enhances or aggravates the coastal erosion in the states like Odisha, in the states like Tamil Nadu. Okay? Sea level rise because of the climate change, altered sediment supply. See, understand, there is one very good concept which we call as the sediment budget. Especially once we talk about the beaches, there is a balance with respect to the sediment budget. Means what? That whatever influx of sediment is there, an equal or a proportionate amount basically flows away. So there is a constant, there is a balance with respect to the overall sediment supply. But when there is an issue with respect to the supply of sediments, and we'll see in the causative factors that how this coastal erosion is aggravating. Why? Because there is a kind of alteration in the balance which is being observed with respect to the sediment supply. Okay? And human interventions ultimately leading to shoreline changes. Over here, I'm using the word shoreline changes. I'm not saying that the shoreline is advancing towards the land. It can also advance towards the sea. That is the area, the land area can increase. Okay? And that is what is known as accretion. Accretion ka matlab kya hai? Accretion simply means that when you have these sediments and they accrete, for example, if because of the wave energy, because of the other factors, if there is a natural increase in the sediments in the beach, in that particular area, then it would basically advance the shoreline towards the sea, and overall the land area would increase. So that leads to accretion. There are some parts of the coastline which are experiencing erosion. There are some parts of the coastline which are basically experiencing stability. There is a sediment balance which is there. And then there are certain parts which are experiencing the accretion, where there is an enhancement in the overall sediment supply. Okay? India's coastal erosion. Now, this is again a very important infographic. So, this is a kind of a stage. Again, very important from the perspective of geography, right? A question can also come in paper 1 with respect to the aspects of the geophysical phenomena with respect to coastal erosion. Okay? Now, what happens is that you have the wave energy and you have the hydraulic action. The water basically pushes on this particular cliff, for example, the cliff, and ultimately it leads to abrasion. It leads to the cracks. And these cracks, because of continuous wave action, because of continuous energy which is being pushed because of the waves or the other tides or the current, it basically converts into a cave. The overall area enhances, okay, because of the hydraulic action. Ultimately, the cave becomes larger, and once it becomes too large, it is basically known as an arch. Okay? The cave breaks through the headland, forming a natural arch, and ultimately what happens is that once you have the break of this particular portion, the portion which basically joins these two stones, we have the formation of a stack. This leaves the arch is eroded and collapses the direction of the cliff, and this is something which leaves a stack. This leaves a tall rock stack. Okay? And ultimately you have the stump which is left. This is basically the process through which you have the coastal erosion which takes place. Okay? It's a kind of a chronological representation of the wave action. Now, India's coastal erosion, we have the current status, and this is basically by the National Center for Coastal Research. They have basically used satellite imagery. They have used GIS, they have used the remote sensing, and then they have come up with this particular numbers. And the time span is from 1990 till 2022, right? What it says is that almost 34.2% of India's coastline, the SS coastlines, it is basically eroding. So you have a very good number which says almost more than 1/3 of India's SS coastlines is basically eroding. Then almost 40% it's stable, and 26.3% is accreting. Over there we are basically finding a buildup of the sediments in the form of the sand, muds, shells. Now this is the number with respect to various states. You can just see, we have for West Bengal, the erosion is more than 60%. And if you just try to correlate with the Sundarbans, where you have a lot of mangroves over there, this is something which is a quite concerning point, because we have the mangroves which basically trap a lot of sediments. Mangroves provide the nurseries with respect to the fishes. Okay, so this is really concerning. Then we have Puducherry, almost 47%. Then we have Kerala, almost 43.9%. And much of this can be correlated to the unsustainable tourism which we are also witnessing in Kerala. Okay. Then we have Tamil Nadu, 39.2. Then we have Gujarat, 31%. We have Andhra Pradesh, 31%. So this is the overall flow. And then we have Odisha, which is almost 28.3%, the erosion. Okay. So these are the numbers. If you just try to remember for one or two states, that would be really important. That would be really good. Now see, often when we are writing the answers, it is really good if you mention a case study. I'm not saying that you mention as a part of the answer itself, but if in a box you can just talk about a case study, okay, then that would really convince the examiner that you have in-depth knowledge with respect to that particular topic. The article talks about Odisha and it says, according to the NCCR assessment, 28.3% of Odisha's coastline is eroding. And this is the map. If you just see, we have some of these three districts. For example, Kendrapara, we have Jagatsinghpur, and we have Ganjam. These three districts where the level of erosion is more than 45%. Itna bhi agar aapne ek box mein likh diya, that would convince the examiner that yes, you have a good knowledge of this particular subject. Okay. Then 17.6% is stable, that is not witnessing any kind of change, and 54.6% is experiencing accretion. There's a buildup of the sediments. You would say, sir, 54% is experiencing accretion. Only 28%, it's much lesser, is experiencing erosion. So that is not a point of concern. It is a point of concern because ultimately it's about the whole balance. We have to take into consideration the overall coastline. If there is a buildup of sediments in one location and erosion, excessive erosion in the other, this is a point of concern because it affects the marine life, it affects the livelihoods, it affects the overall stability with respect to the infrastructure which is there. Roads ho gaya, pipelines ho gayi, utilities ho gayi, you have the poles, electricity poles. So that is a cause of concern. There has to be a stability. This number should be higher. 17.6% should be higher. Okay. Now, what are the consequences? Loss of agricultural land. How the loss of agricultural land takes place? Again, I'm saying these are the topics which are very, very important. Try to interrelate or make a kind of an interlinkage with different topics, and that is how you can understand. You must have heard about the salt water intrusion. Okay. If the water is basically coming towards the land, if the shoreline is advancing towards the land, then that can also lead to the salt water intrusion, or what we call as the ingress of salt water, saline water. Now, if the saline water goes into the soil, that would ultimately lead to a kind of a imbalance with respect to the agricultural productivity, because those salts, previously you have a patch of agricultural land which is basically quite productive and it is producing crops. Now there is the ingress of the salt water. Ultimately, it would affect the productivity of that particular soil, and ultimately there would be a degradation in the overall output. That is how it affects the agricultural aspect. Destruction of the fishing settlements. Obviously, you have settlements with respect to the fishing. If there is more of coastal erosion, the livelihoods of the farmers would be affected. Then displacement of the coastal communities. We are witnessing, and this article talks about that in Odisha, let's suppose we have the case of cyclones. Ab cyclones mein kya hota hai? Let's say a cyclone is striking. So there is a sudden, removal of the habitations of the people. People are removed from those locations. But because of coastal erosion, there is a kind of a slow onset with respect to the displacement of the people. People are realizing that this location is now not suitable for the living, for the habitation. Let's move from here. And therefore, it is leading to a slow onset of displacement. Then loss of sand dunes and vegetation. Sand dunes are something on the beaches which basically stabilize the beaches, which absorb the wave energy. But there is a loss of the sand dunes, and therefore, ultimately, it is affecting the overall sediments, overall stability of the beach itself. Then damage to the roads and the infrastructure. All those roads and infrastructure which are adjoining these coastal areas, they are affected. You must have seen that there are in many of the cases, we have seen that there is sudden collapse of these roads and bridges. Why? Because the foundations of these infrastructure, the pillars, they get affected and ultimately the structure collapse. Then we have threat to turtle nesting and coastal ecosystems. Specifically, once we talk about Odisha, you must be aware of the olive ridley turtles. You must be aware of two locations, Gahir Mata and Rushikulya. And over here, if you have more of the erosions, that affects the survival, that affects the habitation of these olive ridley turtles. Therefore, again, a point of concern. Samajh mein aa gaya? Now, why is coastal erosion increasing? What are the factors? Now, you should divide these into two parts, natural and the human induced. Again, I have seen in many of the answers you are writing, and I really appreciate the efforts of all those who are writing the answers. I have seen that in many of these answers, you are not categorizing. Try to categorize. That would give again a perspective to the examiner that you have a very nice flow with respect to maintaining the points. Okay? The very first is the natural factors. We're not factoring in the climate change, the human-induced climate change. It can be the waves and longshore currents. What is longshore currents? The other name for this is littoral drift. Littoral drift. See, what happens is, let's say this is the boundary and this is the sea and this is the land. Okay? Because of the wave action, because of the continuous wave action, the currents, the tides, what really happens is that there is a movement of the sediments parallel to the shore. The movements of the sediments, it can be the sand, it can be the mud, it can be the shells, parallel to the shore. It's basically a kind of a geophysical phenomena, okay, where there is a movement of these sediments parallel to the shore, which is known as a drift, a littoral drift. Okay? This basically leads to, whenever you have the drift, what would happen is that the sediments in this area would be reduced and there would be a built-up of sediment in this particular area. That is the reason we have 54% is experiencing accretion, but the other 28% is experiencing the erosion. Therefore, because of the longshore drift or littoral drift, parallel movement of sediment along the line of the shore. Okay? Cyclones and storm surges. We already know what happens in Bay of Bengal. This particular region of the Bay of Bengal is prone to cyclonic activities. And whenever there is a cyclonic activity, there is a storm surge. There is a continuous splash of water on the land. And that basically leads to the erosion. Okay? Specifically in Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, West Bengal. And therefore, it leads to shoreline retreat. There's a retreat of shoreline. It advances towards the land. Okay? And the area of the beach, the area of the land reduces. Okay? Tides, it again alters the beach morphology. Why? Because it affects the sediment distribution. Sediment distribution alter ho jata hai tide se. By high tide, low tide. Ultimately, it is doing a kind of a sediment redistribution. And ultimately, it leads to the beach, changes in the beach morphology, beach structure. Okay? Then the sea level rise. Sea level rise, matlab kaise? Normal bhi hota hai. Okay? For example, we have the sea level rise in terms of the thermal expansion. Let's say that you have the heated conditions. Now, in the heated condition, we all know that there is a thermal expansion. Plus, there is enhanced melting of the glaciers and the ice sheets. This ultimately leads to a sea level rise. Whenever there is a sea level rise, this leads to increased coastal inundation. There is increased inundation of the coastal areas, more of flooding, coastal flooding, okay, and erosion risk. And IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, says that because of the climate change, what we are witnessing is that there is enhanced sea level rise, and ultimately that is acting as an aggravating factor for the coastal erosion. Okay? Then sediment dynamics. Continuous sediment budget. Yeah, this is what I talked about. There has to be a continuous sediment budget. The flow of the sediment has to be in proportion. Whatever sediments are coming, it has to be balanced by whatever sediments are flowing out. But because of the construction or because of natural factors, because of many factors, what really happens is that there is an alteration of the sediment budget. And therefore, there is enhanced coastal erosion. Okay? Now, what are the human-induced drivers? The often ignored dimensions. The very first is dams and river regulation. We all know that we have the rivers, which basically flow and make a delta. And then you have the oceans, the sea, or the water bodies. Now, let's say you have this particular river. Rivers obviously erode the land and they bring with them a lot of sediments. Let's suppose that I am constructing a dam over here. what has happened? Now I am obstructing the flow of the natural flow of sediments. I am obstructing the natural flow of the sediments. Therefore, the sediment supply would be affected, and ultimately the sediment budget would be affected. So that is what these infrastructure projects, these are really important. We're not saying that dams are not really important, but you'll have to understand that there is a buildup of sediments. There's a lot of silting which takes place in the dams. You must have studied that there is a process of dredging which is carried out, because itna zyada sediment accumulate ho jata hai dams mein, that there is less of water and more of sediments. It also affects the stability of these embankments of the dams. So therefore, this is a very important concern. River sediment supply to the coast is reduced, and at the delta, the replenishment of the sediments, it is again reduced, and therefore the vulnerability with respect to the erosion, it increases. Ports, harbors and breakwaters. Ab ye dekho. Let's suppose I am creating harbors and ports. Ultimately, this is again important. When we talk about the blue economy, what it says that we should focus on the construction of the ports, we should focus on the construction of the shipping lines, we should focus on coastal industries, the offshore exploration of energy. Okay? Blue economy. Development of local communities. Now let's say again we have this particular area, and this is the sea and this is the land. Over here I have basically there is a construction of the port. Okay. Now just imagine that the flow of the sediment which was coming here because of the littoral drift jo pehle bataya tha, it has now been stopped. Now there is the accumulation of sediments over here, and again this region is suffering from coastal erosion. So even though the very objective of constructing these ports or the harbors is good, we need them for the economic aspect, but again it is leading to a lot of coastal erosion, unknowingly leading to a lot of coastal erosion. Okay? Alteration of the areas, alteration of the sediment budget. Then sand mining, we require a lot of sand. Okay? At the the river carries a lot of sand with it, but because of the illegal sand mining, because of the construction needs, that is again a cause of concern. Then unplanned urbanization. We have a lot of unplanned urbanization which is being carried out in the coastal regions, and that is also affecting the tourism aspect, because of the unsustainable or unplanned urbanization, there is a lot of coastal erosion which is taking place, and it is ultimately affecting the tourism. So this is having a kind of a vicious cycle. Okay? Sea walls and hard structures, it interrupt the sediment movement. Again, these are all the human induced causes. Okay? Now, why climate change? It multiplies the existing vulnerabilities. Climate change is something which is an aggravating factor. Ye important hai word. Aggravating factor means what? That already you have issues in form of the coastal erosion. Because of the climate change, the rate or the pace at which the coastal erosion is taking place, that is enhancing. हुआ क्या यहाँ पर देखो कि भाई because of the increase in the greenhouse gases, there is an increasing warming. Increasing warming leads to more of thermal expansion of the water. It leads to more of melting of the glaciers, more of sea level rise, and more of the coastal erosion. So this is acting as an aggravating factor. Okay? Now, what are the impacts of this? Impacts of coastal erosion. The very first, let's talk about the ecological impact. See, as I told you that we have natural buffers. Use these keywords. We have natural buffers in the form of, for example, the mangroves. Now, mangroves are something, especially if you talk about the Sundarbans, if you talk about the other areas, mangroves are something which basically trap a lot of sediments, and the roots of the mangroves, they basically make sure that there is no erosion. There is less of erosion because it basically keeps the sediment intact. Whenever there is a wave energy, it absorbs the wave energy. Plus, the roots of these mangroves, they act as the areas for a kind of a nursery for fishes. Okay, where there is a kind of a growth of the fishes. So these are very, very important. These are natural buffers. But because of unsustainable urbanization, because of the unplanned urbanization, a lot of these mangroves are being rooted. They're rooted out. And therefore, that is a cause of concern. It is ultimately leading to a lot of coastal erosion. Okay, India's Sundarbans. Then we have coral reefs and seagrass vulnerability. Again, these structures. Because of the coastal erosion, let's say there is a particular place which is now intact, natural. Now, there is some particular project which is being carried out. It would alter the balance. It would alter the sediment budget. And ultimately, the coral reefs which are there, the seaweeds which are there, that would be affected because there would be a lot of sediment which would flow and that would obstruct the sunlight. And therefore, it would affect the survival of these coral reefs. Okay. Then turtle nesting, olive ridley turtles and Gahirmatha and Rushikule already discussed. Then loss of sand dunes. Sand dunes are those structures which absorb a lot of wave energy. They protect these coastal areas. But because of the continuous erosion, these sand dunes are also reduced. And therefore, the stability of the coastal areas is impacted. Then what are the socio-economic impacts? The fisher folk. Because of the enhanced coastal erosion, the livelihoods of the fishermen are affected. They don't have the adequate supply of the fishes. Okay. Then agriculture, saltwater intrusion. The ingress of the salt water reduces the productivity of the agriculture. Then we have displacement. I told you that because of the cyclones and all these activities, there is a sudden displacement. But because of the coastal erosion, there is a slow onset of displacement which we are observing now, especially in Odisha. Then the infrastructure. What happens is because of this coastal erosion, the stability of the infrastructure is at stake. Okay? And therefore, at many places, we have observed the collapse of the roads, the collapse of the bridges. Okay? Now, again, coastal erosion as a blue economy paradox, which we have already discussed, means what? That though we are emphasizing, though we are giving an impetus on the blue economy with respect to the construction of the ports, with respect to the shipping lines, with respect to the coastal industries, but again, that in one way or the other, it is also compromising the coastal stability because it is leading to coastal erosion. So there is a kind of a paradox. Though we say that blue economy is a sustainable concept, but at many of the places, it is leading to unwanted coastal erosion. Now, what has been the government response? We have, for example, the National Center for Coastal Research, which has gone for shoreline monitoring, and it has used remote sensing, satellite imagery, GIS, and other technological interventions to basically come up with this. And the period has been from 1990 till 2022. So we have the data with respect to that. Data is again very important for any policy making. You need to have the data in place and what we call as evidence-based policy making. Okay. Next, we have the Coastal Vulnerability Index, which has been developed by the INCOIS. Now, Coastal Vulnerability Index, it basically tracks कि भाई salt water ingress कहाँ पे ज़्यादा है, what is the level of, what is the kind of increase which we are observing with respect to the sea level rise, which all areas are more vulnerable to the salt water ingress or the coastal erosion. So that is a kind of an index which gives us the clear picture. Then we have the Coastal Regulation Zone Framework. Now, in the coast, through this particular zonation, what we have done is we have categorized the area where the development can take place, where the development cannot take place, where the construction activities can take place. So this is a kind of an approach, a graded approach, which basically tells us or guides us that how the development should take place in the coastal region. Then we have, and what it talks about is a kind of a balance. There has to be a balance with respect to the ecology, the livelihoods of, for example, the farmers, the fisher folks, the infrastructure, because there is also the need for the creation of the infrastructure and disaster resilience. So there is a kind of a balance among all these fours. Then we have integrated coastal zone management. What it says, the very premise of integrated coastal zone management is that this is not something which is just a kind of an issue which relates to the ecosystem. Rather, it's something which also has a lot of socio-economic dimensions. So we'll have to look at the coastal management as a coastal area management from that perspective, from different perspectives. We'll have to factor in the requirements of the people who are dependent on these coasts. We'll have to factor in the livelihoods of the people. We'll have to factor in the ecological needs. And therefore, we come up with the integrated coastal zone management, where different stakeholders are involved in the overall decision making. Okay. Odisha's geotextile tube approach. So what Odisha has done is, you can just see, these are the geotubes. Geotextile tubes. Now, these are made of permeable membrane, right? And these comprise of the sand. What it does is that whenever you have you can see there is the wave energy which is striking. These geotubes, they basically prevent these washing of the sediment, and therefore they act as a buffer. But again, what you'll have to understand is these are something which cannot be applied everywhere. Okay. But what should be the way forward? See, we have the geotubes, for example, as we just talked about over here. But is it something which is a sustainable strategy? No, the answer is no. We should go with the nature-based solutions first. And when we feel that bhai, yahan pe nature-based solutions won't work, over there then we can go for the hard infrastructure. Okay? Work with nature, not against it. what should be the way forward? The very first is that we need to focus on extensive mangrove restoration, because mangroves are those entities which basically preserve the overall ecosystem. They keep the sediment intact, the supply of the sediment intact, and they absorb the wave energy. Plus, it acts as a habitat. It acts as a kind of a nursery for the fishes. So again, very, very important. Then dune restoration. Wherever we have seen at different coastal areas that there were dunes, and now the overall size of the dunes has reduced. There has to be the nourishment of those dunes. There has to be a supply of the sediments over there. Okay. Then we have beach nourishment. It can be done through similar sediments. There can be the supply of the similar sediments through the beach nourishment. Then we have the wetland restoration, very, very important. At many of the places you must have observed, especially those aspirants who are from these coastal states, that we have the sea, for example, and we have at many places the wetlands. Now these are the areas which absorb a lot of shocks. But because of the encroachment, because of the commercialization of the land, what we have observed is that there has been the encroachment of these wetlands, especially near Chennai, because of the need for the development. And now these wetlands are no more, and therefore the areas are now subjected to more of coastal erosion. So we need to focus on the restoration of these wetlands near the coastal regions. Okay. Then living shorelines, we need to have the construction of more, not construction, the plantation of more of the vegetation over there. Okay. Vegetation, wetlands, reefs, limited engineering. So we need to go for limited hard infrastructure. Rather, we should go for green infrastructure. We can go for the plantation of the trees along the shores. That would keep the sediments intact. Okay. Better coastal governance. Now, this is again very, very important. See, as of now, what you'll have to understand is that there are multiple entities who are basically looking at this particular domain. We have the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. We have the Ministry of Earth Sciences. We have the state government. We have the district administration. We have the coastal zone authorities. We have the municipality. So, number of entities which are involved. We have the local population. So, there has to be an inclusion of all these stakeholders. What we talked about is integrated coastal zone management. There has to be the inclusion of all the stakeholders in order to come to particular decision. Okay. Soft engineering first, hard engineering where unavoidable. So in those areas where you think that the natural inputs won't work, the natural solutions won't work, you can go for hard engineering. For example, you have the sea walls, you have groins. This is groin. So what, as I told you before, we have this particular, for example, this is the sea and this is the land, right? There is a drift of littoral drift of the sediments. So we construct these barriers so that they can stop the supply. They can stop the supply of these at equidistance. We construct these timber and not of a kind of a hard infrastructure. This is, for example, the timber. Okay, so we create the timber, groins, and this basically stops the sediments flow. It stops the littoral drift, and therefore it, in one way or the other, it balances. It keeps the balance with respect to sediment supply. So this can be also done. What you'll have to understand is, see, we have a long coastline, but still it is being subjected to a lot of coastal erosion. We have the natural factors and we have the human-induced factors. But again, because of it, it is leading to a lot of socio-economic impact, not just the environmental degradation. Rather, the livelihoods of the farmers are at stake. So again, this is something which is a very serious issue and we'll have to work on this particular part. Let's have a mains practice question. It's a 15 marker which I've given you. But again, if a question comes with respect to coastal erosion, you'll be able to address it in its entirety comprehensively. Coastal erosion in India is no longer merely an environmental concern, but a growing threat to livelihoods, infrastructure and human settlements. Discuss the major causes, we have done that, and impacts of coastal erosion in India, and suggest a sustainable ecosystem based approach to address it. So we have a 15 marker. Please do write, and again I really appreciate the efforts of all those who are writing the answers. This is the only way to have your name in the list. So continue writing, and yes, if you're liking the initiative, do not forget to press the like button, and also let us know in the comments. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, this is about India's sweet revolution. We have one particular research work which has been co-authored by Mr. Ashok Gulati, which has been published in the Indian Express. What the research work says is that India is one of the largest producers of honey in the world, and we also export a large volume to different countries. But we should not just look at this particular situation from that aspect of economic returns or economic gains. Rather, we should also give due recognition to the contribution which is made by the bees specifically with respect to the pollination services. So they act as a kind of the agricultural workforce. Again, a very, very important topic because it concerns with the livelihood, or it relates to the livelihood of the farmers. Okay. So again, very, very important. Bees are not merely honey producers, they are essential for pollination services and therefore act as the agricultural workforce. Okay. Important component of GS3 economy and environment. Why the future depends on saving the bee. Bees are not merely honey producers, they are essential for pollination services. As I told you, that they contribute a lot with respect to the agricultural activities. They provide the pollination services and therefore they also aid in the overall productivity of the agriculture. So they act as agricultural workforce. The Food and Agricultural Organization estimates that almost more than 75% of the major food crops, they are partly dependent on the pollinators, the bees, for example, right? And pollinators contribute to more than 35% of global crop production by volume. Can you just quantify the importance of these pollinators, including the bee? That 35% of the global food production of these crop production, it is dependent by volume, it is dependent on these pollinators. So don't just look from that perspective of that we are getting the honey. No, it's not just from the perspective of the economic returns in terms of the volume of the honey which we are getting. No, rather we should also look at the contribution being made with respect to the pollination services. Okay? A bee colony can generate value twice. How? Through honey and through higher agricultural productivity. Because if there is, let's say there is a beehive, okay? So over there you will have more of the agricultural productivity also. Why? Because these bees would also act as pollinators. And in one way or the other, the adjoining fruits or the vegetables or the crops, they would have more of productivity because there would be more of pollination. Got it? So beekeeping has a triple dividend. It has a triple dividend. First, with respect to the farm income, let's say the beekeeper who's basically going for this beehive and everything. So you have the farm income. Next, you have the pollinations and it enhances the productivity of the adjoining crops, the crops in that particular area. It can be the flowers, it can be, the fruits, the vegetables, and biodiversity conservation. It also leads to biodiversity conservation. There is a kind of enhancement in the diversity with respect to the species over there. Okay. Now, India's honey sector, let's talk about this. India is a major global honey producer and exporter. These are the numbers. We have APIDA, Agriculture and Processed Foods Export Development Authority. Tell me the ministry under which APIDA comes. Okay, and what kind of body APIDA is. Okay, do let me know in the comment section. APIDA, according to APIDA, natural honey production, it was almost to the tune of 1.52 lakh metric tons in 2024-25. Natural honey exports worth almost $206.47 million was there in financial year 24-25. And what are the major destinations with respect to the natural honey? We have, for example, primarily it's the US, then you have the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Portugal, and Libya. So a lot of the exports fly to US, right? Natural honey. India is the second largest global honey exporter after China. And this is again according to APIDA. If we talk about the regional production of the honey, we have, for example, Uttar Pradesh contributing almost 17%, West Bengal almost 16%, Punjab 14%, Bihar 12%, Rajasthan 9%. Now, do remember because this can be asked in the examination. Now, India's sweet revolution. The government launched the National Beekeeping and Honey Mission. See, these are some of the areas where you can expect a bouncer. I'm obviously talking about the mains part, right? Because we have the Indian economy and we have the agricultural part which is covered in the GS3. So definitely these are very, very important. Specifically, why? Because they relate to the livelihoods of the small and marginal farmers. So again, very, very important. National Beekeeping and Honey Mission in 2020 to promote scientific beekeeping and achieve the objective of sweet revolution. We have this particular National Beekeeping and Honey Mission, which is a central sector scheme. All of the funds are contributed by the center. Okay? No contribution is by the state. Implemented by the National Bee Board. Total outlay is more than 500 crores. It focuses upon the productivity investment, post-harvest management, research and technology. And what all institutional interventions have been done through this? National Bee Board. For example, it basically also provides the laboratories with respect to the disease surveillance. It provides the laboratories with respect to the quality of the honey which is being produced. It provides that particular certifications which are really needed. It also provides the for the formation of FPOs, farmer produce organizations, so that we can have these small farmers. They can basically they can collectivize, and then there can be more of the bargaining power which these farmers have, the farmers produce organizations. So these are some of the steps which has been taken by the National Bee Board. What are the major challenges with respect to this? The very first is pollinator decline. Why we are witnessing pollination decline? Because there is more of the commercialization of the agriculture. Normally you would find that you have these beehives at those locations which are not touched, which are isolated. But when you go for more of the commercialization of the agriculture, what happens is that you use more of these pesticides, you use more of the chemical inputs, and that affects the survival of these bees, for example. And therefore, ultimately, the agricultural productivity is reduced. Can you just imagine? Almost 35% of the overall food production depends on these pollinators. And when we'll use more of these pesticides, or we'll go for monoculture, or let's say the climate change, let's say there is erratic rainfall or sudden increase in the temperature. So therefore, we'll have less of these pollinators. Then climate change. There is a change which is being observed with respect to the transitioning of the seasons. See, these species, for example, bees, they work as per the seasons. There is a kind of a change which is being observed with respect to the weather patterns. Let's talk about the rainfall. Previously, there used to be a balance with respect to the rainfall distribution. Now, what we are witnessing is more of the intense rainfall, and that too for a shorter period. Erratic distribution of rainfalls, that affects the overall productivity. Okay? Bee flower crop relationship gets affected. Then we have low value realization. Understand, see, we have less even, and over here, just see what we have written. It's about natural honey exports. We are not focusing on commercializing the honey which we are producing. This is again very, very important. For example, there's one particular variety of honey which is produced in New Zealand, which is known as Manuka honey. And it is sold at very high prices. Why? Because they focus on branding. They have excessively focused on the branding aspect of it. They provide the testing certificates, they provide everything, and therefore it is sold at much higher price in the markets, for example, in US or UAE or other countries. So we have not focused on branding aspect. That is very, very, we have very small farmers who are basically engaged in that. They don't have the capacity to basically go for certifications, to go for branding, to go for the other things. Traceability. Traceability kya hota hai? Very important in the food chain. Traceability means ki bhai, specifically these countries like US and the other countries, they demand the traceability certificates. Means what? From the very production at the farm level, to that of the processing, to that of the exports. When was the crop produced? When was this particular food item produced? How you have basically, processed it? The record of every stage has to be maintained, and that is traceability. Because if you don't have the traceability, these consumers, especially the rich countries, they won't accept your product. So we need to focus on traceability. We need to focus on testing. We need to focus on certification. Okay? Quality and adulteration concerns. See, if there is adulteration, and we already know in India, almost everything is adulterated. Okay? Almost every food is adulterated. How would you be able to export to these countries? They don't want adulterated foods. They are ready to pay whatever price you're asking, but they need residue-free, ekdam pure food. Okay? Export consideration. I was reading one of the reports which says that the mangoes which India produces, the best quality mangoes in India, which are pesticide free, which are totally organic, they are not consumed in India. Rather, they are consumed in the other countries around the world. So the best of the mangoes which we are producing are not consumed in India. Rather, they are consumed in the other countries. Why? Because they're exported. Got it? Export concentration is in USA. Most of the honey which we are exporting, it goes to the USA. And understand what Trump is doing. The president of the US has been imposing a lot of tariffs, and that affects the supply, that affects the export of honey to these countries because of the geopolitical disruptions. Got it? the tariffs and other thing. What should be the way forward? From honey economy to pollination economy, we need to look at the whole discipline in a quite broad manner. Okay? Protect the pollinator habitats. What we can do for this is bee-friendly flora. We can, go for more of these, for example, the hedgerows. We can go for more of these flowering plants so that there is an incentive for these bees to basically live over there. Okay? Agricultural landscapes need to be made in such a manner that you have more of bees in that particular area. Okay? Promote scientific beekeeping, better hive management, the beehive, the place at which the bee basically secrete that particular honey. Disease surveillance. Okay? Rational pesticide use. We can go for integrated pest management, IPM, integrated pest management. Then we can use biopesticides which do not harm these pollinators. Then we have built premium Indian honey brands. It should not be just like that India sells honey. Rather, India sells differentiated, traceable Indian honey. So we need to go for branding of these, global branding. And then suddenly there would be an enhancement in the overall price which we are getting, specifically the farmers. Then strengthen the farmers produce organization. Why? Because FPOs are very important. If you really have to give farmers their due share, farmers get very minimal amount. You need to focus on the FPOs, farmer produce organizations. Usse kya hoga? The bargaining power of these farmers would enhance when they would collectivize. Okay? The aggregation of the farmers, processing, testing, branding and export. It's a whole chain altogether. Then recognize the economic value of pollination. Very, very important. The government should not just focus on the economic value of the exports of the honey or the production of the honey, rather also the economic value of the pollination, so that more of the efforts are put in place to protect these bees. Got it? So again, very, very important. There can be a probable question with respect to the beekeeping. Why? Because again, it has been featured in the newspaper. There has been research and again forms a very, very important component with respect to the Indian economy with specific reference to, the small and marginal farmers. So very, very important. Okay, let's go through a 10 marker. It's a small question. India's beekeeping sector has significant potential to enhance the agricultural productivity, diversify the farmers' income. We also had the goal of doubling farmers' income, right? Strengthen the rural livelihoods, discuss the challenges. And see, in a country like India, where you have much of the agriculture as rain-fed, farmers need to diversify their options. And therefore, these activities are very, very important. Okay? For example, the beekeeping. Discuss the challenges associated with India's sweet revolution and suggest a way forward. Quite a simple question, do right, but because again, it's the most important way to develop your base with respect to answer writing. Let's go to the mains value addition part. Coming to the mains value addition, we have the data point, which basically talks about one very important concern, and that is with respect to the time poverty. There is a kind of a double burden which the women have. See, women on one hand, they have their obligations with respect to the family. On the other hand, they have obligations with respect to their career. They have professional obligations. And there is uneven distribution with respect to the responsibilities. We have the time use survey and the data with respect to the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. We have the chart 1, which says time spent on housework, unpaid domestic and caregiving services. This is the minutes per day. You can just see with respect to the age, specifically this component from almost 18 years to that of over here 45 years. Just look at the time spent by the males. It's so less. This is so less. The top is over here. And the time spent by the females on the domestic and caregiving services. So they are not just contributing with respect to their professional obligations. They are. At the same time, they're also doing much of the domestic chores. So this is again a concern. You'll have to factor in the unpaid care. Okay. Look at this. The time spent by children on domestic work, leisure and learning. See, almost once we talk about the learning female and the learning male, it's almost similar. But look at the domestic work for female and look at the domestic work for male, the blue. It's almost negligible for the male and it increases. The domestic work for the female increases. And that has basically an effect on the leisure, on the time you basically rest. Look at this. For the male, it is over here, and for the female, it goes down. So they are basically giving less of time to the leisure. They're not able to take enough rest because they're contributing more to the household chores. Okay. Then you have the other things, for example, the participation rate of girls and boys who engage in different types of housework. Let's just look at girls aged 15 to 17 years and boys aged 15 to 17 years. Look at this, childcare. Again, very, it's much higher for the girls. Then we have the cleaning, almost zero by the boys, right? Then we have cooking, we have almost 3 by the boys, and look at this, 42.4 by the girls. Then most of what you'll have to understand is, you can just take 1 or 2 data points from here, and whenever there's a question with respect to the lack of participation of women in the economic domain, this is one of the reasons which you can cite, and over there you can talk about these data points. So this is a concept of time poverty which women suffer. This is a concept of double burden which women suffer. Got it? Let's go to the prelims pointers. Coming to the prelims pointers, we have the very first topic which talks about the groundwater contamination. Now, this is a news report coming from the Kanpur and Fatehpur districts of UP, where chromium contamination has been witnessed, and this is leading to the yellow color in the water because of the presence of chromium, right? It says that in about a dozen areas of 3 districts of Uttar Pradesh, Fatehpur, Kanpur Dehat and Kanpur Nagar, the groundwater has been contaminated by the chemical chromium-6 or hexavalent chromium. So hexavalent chromium is again a type of chromium which we have, and that is basically leading to the contamination. Chromium is a naturally occurring hard grayish metal found in rocks and soil, but chromium-6 compounds are produced by chemical industry and are used in a wide range of applications such as electroplating, wood preservation. Hexavalent chromium is bright yellow, green and highly reactive. So understand the kind of contamination which we have in the groundwater. It is primarily because of the contamination of the aquifers in the ground, and this is because of its usage in the industries. So therefore, it is basically a kind of a human-induced factor which has basically led to the contamination of the water sources, and it is leading to a lot of diseases in the people, right? Now, the news says groundwater contamination by the hexavalent chromium. These are the parts affected, right? Because of tannery, chemical industrial waste. We know that Kanpur is known for its leather production, right? And hexavalent chromium is used in that, right? Also in electroplating industry. So that is again a cause of concern. Health risk, it exposes, there's exposure of the chromium-6, and this is associated with skin disorders, gastrointestinal problems and cancer risk, because this acts as a severe form of carcinogenic. IARC classifies inhaled chromium-6 compounds as carcinogenic. Legacy pollution, about 62,225 tons of chromium waste. Can you just imagine the estimate? The level of the pollution which we have, almost 62,000 tons of chromium waste was identified at Rania. Remediation followed the NGT, National Green Tribunal intervention. Governance gaps, pollution persists due to weak enforcement, delayed remediation and inadequate safe water supply. Although these chemicals which are used, they need to be, clearly there has to be a proper segregation of the waste, but that is not followed. There has to be a proper waste disposal. Why? Because there is a nexus between the local officials, between these industry owners, and that is leading to the environmental degradation. The people in the end are suffering because of that. Okay. Let's also talk about the other forms of water contamination. We have arsenic. This is prevalent in Ganga Brahmaputra basin. Chronic exposure leads to skin lesions and cancers. Fluoride, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, etc. leads to the dental or skeletal fluorosis. Remember these diseases, these are quite important. Nitrate linked to the fertilizer use, sewage and livestock waste widespread in several regions. We have uranium, sporadic contamination reported in Rajasthan, Punjab, Haryana, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana. Heavy metals, for example, lead, chromium, manganese, mercury from industrial mining activities. Biological contamination, pathogens from untreated sewage cause diarrheal and other waterborne diseases. Emerging contaminants, we have the PFAS, we have pharmaceuticals, we have pesticides, microplastics pose newer monitoring challenges. See, what you'll have to understand, these inputs are really important for different sectors. For example, pharmaceuticals, for manufacturing, for the other things. But there has to be a proper waste disposal. If you're using these as an input, there would be obviously waste. But you should focus on the waste disposal, but that is not there. Ultimately, what happens is that these are basically discharged in the normal drains, and that leaches into the groundwater and ultimately the aquifers, and ultimately there is a loss with respect to the health of the people. Way forward should be source control, polluter pays principle, very important. We had this particular principle which was highlighted in the Vellore city case. very important. Okay. Aquifer mapping, real-time monitoring, decentralized treatment, safe piped water, community participation. Community participation has to be there, and there has to be effective enforcement. Without enforcement, nothing is going to happen. Central Groundwater Board conducts the systematic groundwater quality monitoring and maintains a national water quality data sets. So again, very, very important concern, because ultimately it is leading to severe forms of disease in the people. And that also has an effect on the economic potential of the people, because they get they have the disease because of this, and ultimately their potential, their contribution to the economy reduces. Got it? Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic, it is about the Directorate of Revenue Intelligence, which has busted Erica nut import racket. Let's talk about what Directorate of Revenue Intelligence is all about. It was constituted in 1957 as the apex anti-smuggling intelligence and investigating agency. It works under the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Customs, Ministry of Finance. DRI enforces the provisions. This is important because it can be asked, and we have seen UPSCs asking these questions where it puts the institutions first and what is their mandate and under which ministry it comes. So do remember, it enforces the provisions of the Customs Act 62 and over 50 others allied act, including the Arms Act, NDPS, Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act. We have the Conservation of Foreign Exchange and Preservation of the Smuggling Activity, Prevention of Smuggling Activities, Wildlife Act and Antiquities Act. It is tasked with detecting and curbing the smuggling of contraband, which are prohibited items, including drug trafficking and illicit international trade in wildlife and environmentally sensitive items. For example, you have the elephant tusks, which are basically illegally exported and imported, smuggled, as well as combating the commercial frauds related to the international trade and evasion of custom duty. It has a country-wide network of zonal, regional and sub-regional units. DRI collects, analyzes and disseminates, spreads the intelligence to the field formations, helps in the investigation and keeps the statistics of the seizure, whatever items it seizes. It basically keeps a record of that. Prices, rates for watching the trends of smuggling and movement of other contraband, and suggests remedies for fixing the loopholes. The DRI has also been designated as the lead agency for ESCOD, the National Anti-Smuggling Coordination Center. Very important. DRI has been also at the forefront in international customs collaboration through Customs Mutual Assistance Agreements of CBIC with over 60 other countries. So it basically also does the collaboration and coordination with the other countries, where the thrust is on information exchange and learning from the best practices of other customs administration. So again, important body, can be asked in the prelims. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the next topic is a mention of South Korea, which has basically gone for the warning shots at the demarcation line. So again, this IR mapping becomes very, very important. This is the Korean Peninsula which we have. We have South Korea over here. We have North Korea. We have the capital Seoul and Pyongyang over here. Okay. Now, what you'll have to understand is that there are certain the water bodies. We have the Sea of Japan, and we have the island of Japan, Honshu over here, and we have the Yellow Sea over here. This is the Korean Bay which we have. Now, we have 38 parallel, 38 latitude, okay, which basically once upon a time before the Korean War, which basically divided the boundaries between the North Korea and the South Korea, okay. But now we have this particular demilitarized zone. We have the military demarcation line, which basically forms the border between South Korea and North Korea. The military demarcation line, sometimes referred to as the armistice line, is the effective land border or the demarcation line between North Korea and South Korea. On either side of the line is the Korean demilitarized zone. So there is a zone which is completely demilitarized. The MDL and the DMZ were established by the Korean Armistice Agreement. In the Yellow Sea, the Koreas are divided by de facto maritime military demarcation line. So over here, it's talking about there is also a kind of a de facto division between the maritime boundaries of North Korea and South Korea. Military demarcation line and maritime boundaries called Northern Limit Line, drawn by the United Nations Command in 1953. The NLL is not described by the Korean Armistice Agreement. So just remember, we have this particular location, and remember, we have the Korean Strait over here, and we have the Jeju Strait over here. Okay, and this is 38 parallel is basically was the kind of a border before the war, but now it is the MDL, military demarcation line, which serves as a border between North Korea and South Korea. Remember, the water locations, the water bodies in this particular peninsula, near the peninsula, can be asked in the prelims. Let's go to the next topic. Coming to the last topic of today's discussion is a mention of one particular dance form, and this is artists performing Pulikali, tiger dance, during the Atachamayam procession, which marks the start of the 10-day Onam celebrations in Ernakulam district of Kerala. So again, important. Let's see what this is all about. About Pulikali. Pulikali, tiger dance, is among the folk art forms of Kerala, one of the folk art forms of Kerala. On the 4th day of Onam festival, artists paint their body like tigers with strips of yellow, red and black and dance to the rhythm of traditional percussion instruments such as Thakil, Uduku and Chenda. The Swaraj ground in Thrissur district plays the host to this carnival that has people appearing in various unique hues and masks. The main theme of this folk art is tiger hunting, with participants playing the role of tiger and hunter. It was introduced by the erstwhile ruler of Cochin, Maharaja Rama Varma Sakthan Tampuran, right? So remember, key facts about the Onam: it's the biggest and the most important festival of the state of Kerala. It is a harvest festival celebrated in the beginning of the month of Chingam, the first month of Malayalam calendar. The Onam lasts for 4 to 10 days. First day Antam and the 10th day Thiru Onam are the most important of all. According to a popular legend, the festival is celebrated to welcome King Mahabali, whose spirit is said to visit Kerala at the time of Onam. Another key feature is Vallamkali, the snake boat race, very, very important, held on the river Pampa. Kaikoti Kali and Tumbi Thulal are two graceful dances performed by women on Onam. So remember, can be asked in the prelims, because we have seen a lot of questions coming from art and culture in the UPSC. That's all from my side. I hope you enjoyed the session. All the very best. And yes, keep writing the answers, because again, very, very important. That's the only way to secure the name in the list. Take care of yourself. Thank you.